kit behind me because Guy Mackenzie is a drummer, but he also collects some fantastic guitars. We have here Britain's earliest electric guitars made by Supersound. Tell me about Supersound.
Well, this guitar dates to summer '58. It's the oldest surviving solid electric guitar commercially built in this country, and it may in fact be the guitar that was used by the Ted Taylor Four in 1958 when the band appeared on a television show called The Jack Jackson Show.
So we're going to stay around about the 50s again, late 50s, with a couple of Dallas guitars made again in the UK. We have a 6-string here with 1 string on it and a bass version. Tell me about this one first, Guy.
Okay, Dallas Tuxedos were the very first sort of mass-produced, if you like, solid electric guitars and basses in the UK. When I say mass, they weren't made in huge numbers like we know today, but certainly in the hundreds. And this was an inexpensive guitar, although the majority of them had 1 pickup, and the 1 pickup one was launched in April '59, but the 2 pickup one, which you have in your hands now, was launched in about September '59. And interestingly enough, an identical guitar to this was found in the loft of John Lennon's childhood home many years after he'd left.
Lovely, too. And the bass version, just a bigger slightly, but oh no, it is stretched a bit, the bass. But
yeah, the bass version is very interesting because this was launched again in the sort of September, October '59, and this was actually a first bass for many well-known bass players in this country, not least of all Bill Wyman.
Really?
Of course, yeah.
Has he still got one?
He still has his,
oh, really?
And he's actually put a second cutaway in his, and it's featured in a display case in his Sticky Fingers restaurant.
Guy's passion for early British electric guitars also enters the Burns territory. Now this Burns that we just don't recognise.
And you won't, because this in fact was built for Supersound. It was going to be the first production Supersound guitar, and an advert appeared in Melody Maker on the 13th of December 1958 advertising a guitar that looked very similar to this. But by the time the advert appeared, both Jim Burns, who made the bodies, and Ike Isaac, who was endorsing the guitar, had both had their agreements with Supersound terminated. And he actually, not being employed by Supersound, he started making them himself. And this was the very first one he made, and he sold this in December 1958. And this is the oldest true Burns guitar. And interestingly enough, it has a plastic back.
You're a mind of information, Guy. So, next, look, what a bass, a Burns bass none of us recognise.
Well, this was the very next stage, because when Jim Burns started making guitars himself, he then hooked up, is I think the right expression, with Henry Weill, who was an amp maker, and they formed a partnership called Burns Weill. And this is one of the early Burns Weill guitars. It's affectionately known as the Martian cricket bat, but this particular bass
Relate to that.
was actually owned by John Godfrey of the Mungo Jerry Band, which he played
Only in the summertime, I would have thought.
I was going to say on most of his hits.
So let's just stay with the basses again here. We've now got a Fenton wheel bass. This looks, it's like archaic, isn't it? Agricultural almost.
Well, it's interesting because it was designed on the basis of the Guy-tone guitars that were coming in from Japan.
As you can see with the shape.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But this, in fact, Lars, which you probably didn't notice, is actually a Burns wheel. And it was known as the Burns Wheel Fenton. And if you remember Shane Fenton and the Fentones, they got their name from that. Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent.
But it's just, this was the sort of the cheaper version, whereas the Martian cricket bat was known as the Super Streamline.
Moving on, we are now in the 60s, and Guy has got a very, very early Watkins rapier.
It is. This, in fact, is known as the Watkins Rapier Deluxe. And it was one of the very first Watkins rapiers built. And as we all know, Watkins rapier was the biggest selling solid electric guitar British made in the 60s. But this was the forerunner of it. And I just think it's fabulous.
Lovely restored. Is that one with the flat neck profile?
This has got a very interesting neck
Yes, look at
profile,
that.
as you rightly say.
Yeah,
it is
look at
absolutely flat, completely different to anything you see these days.
And wonderfully restored too.
Yes, it's
Very
been,
good condition.
It's been beautifully restored.
And also from the 60s, a Grimshaw bass. Now that's a name. Grimshaw basses. Let's have a little swap here. Look at that big chunky baby.
Well, the Grimshaw, as you probably know, Lars, was
I do.
really old British name
Yes.
of guitar builders, dating back to the early part of the last century, although this one does date from 1966. The pickups actually have been changed because when I got this, it was in little pieces and big pieces, and it's been beautifully put back together again.
With original flat wound strings.
Absolutely.
Lovely. Still in the swinging 60s, we have a couple of Vox now. This is a Vox.
This is a Vox Shadow, built in about 1962, and interesting enough, this was contracted out to G-Plan.
What, the furniture people?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think it's great, and it's a bit of British
It's
guitar
just simple,
history.
isn't it? Simplicity works sometimes.
Absolutely.
And the aerial socket.
Yeah,
Have you still got the lead?
I have actually.
Really?
Yes, I have.
Is it really the lead?
Yeah.
And obviously classic Vox Teardrop Bass. Tell me about that one. So many stories behind that one.
Well, this is a very interesting one because a very similar Vox Teardrop Bass, in fact, to this was built in Italy, but this, in fact, was built in the UK. The story of how it came to me is interesting because a friend of mine in Scotland found it in a skip and contacted me, said, was I interested in it? They weren't able to send me a picture, but of course I was, and so I've ended up with it. It's a wonderful instrument.
Original colour?
Original colour, yeah.
Good Lord, beautiful. We're going to stay with some Burns now, moving on to the era that I remember, or people a little bit older than me remember. We have the Burns.
Vibra artist.
That's correct.
The vibra comes from the vibrato, of course, and the artist was the very first guitar that Jim Burns built once he parted company with Henry Weill.
Lovely small body, busy eyes. Like it, very nice. And this one, of course, we're all starting to remember this one now, aren't we? The Burns, almost Strat type configuration with permutations of the pickups.
This is moving on a little bit and getting more into Burns guitars that perhaps people know and love so much. This is the Split Sonic, built in 1963. Interesting because it has split pickups. It's also got some interesting combinations there, including jazz, treble, and Wild Dog.
Yes, I remember Wild Dog. That was really trebly, wasn't it? Yeah. Split you in half. But again, starting to get a little bit creative. Because, I mean, back there we were a little bit behind America, weren't we?
We certainly were, but I think my feeling is that Burns are very different to Fenders and Gibsons, but they have a particular following all of their own. It's a fabulous looking guitar in my opinion, and it's a real piece of quality.